The siren's wail pierced the suffocating humidity of the Texas night, a mechanical scream that tore through the remnants of my shattered mind. I was running, my boots sinking into the muddy banks of the Rio Grande, but I wasn't just running from the flashing red and blue lights painting the trees behind me. I was running from the blood on my hands. My name is Thomas. I was born in the forgotten Rust Belt town of Dayton, Ohio, a place where the American dream was buried long ago under boarded up factories and rusted steel mills. I was a simple man, a mechanic, a husband to a beautiful woman named Elena, and a father to a bright eyed little girl named Lily. We were poor, scraping by on pennies, drowning in overdue bills and eviction notices. When the factory closed, the crushing weight of poverty broke me. I sought an escape, a temporary numbness from the shame of failing my family. It started with a pill given to me by a desperate friend. It ended in a nightmare of crystal meth and tainted fentanyl that hijacked my soul. I remember the night my world ended in fragmented, jagged flashes of lightning. I was high, lost in a paranoid psychosis, my brain convinced that monstrous intruders had broken into our tiny, crumbling apartment. The shadows morphed into demons. I grabbed my hunting knife to protect my family. I swung at the dark, screaming, fighting the monsters with every ounce of my strength. When the haze finally broke the next morning, the winter sun creeping through our cracked blinds illuminated a reality worse than hell. The demons weren't real, but the bodies on the floor were. My beautiful Elena, my sweet Lily, I had destroyed the only things I ever loved. The scream that tore from my throat that morning didn't even sound human. I wanted to turn the blade on myself, to end the agony right then and there, but cowardice and pure primal panic took over. I ran. I drove south, a dead man walking, fueled by stolen gas and the last remnants of my poison stash, fleeing the jurisdiction of the Ohio police, the state troopers, and eventually the FBI. I crossed into Mexico like a ghost, slipping through the cracks of the earth. I had nothing, no money, no identity, no soul. I collapsed in the sweltering heat of the Sonoran Desert, fully expecting the vultures to pick my bones clean. Instead, I was found by the Los Culebras cartel. They dragged my dehydrated, sunburned body into the back of a dusty pickup truck and tossed me into a compound in the mountains of Sinaloa. They were going to execute me, another nameless American junkie who wandered too far. But when their armored transport truck, a heavily modified beast they used to ram border checkpoints, broke down during a rival shootout, my survival instincts kicked in. Under a hail of bullets, my old mechanic skills resurrected. I bypassed the blown fuel pump, hot-wired the ignition, and drove the cartel boss, a ruthless man named Alejandro El Lobo Vargas, out of the kill zone. I saved his life, and in return, he gave me a new one. I became El Fantasma, the ghost. Alejandro saw a man with absolutely nothing to lose, a man whose eyes were as dead as the desert stones. I became his mechanic, then his driver, and eventually his most trusted enforcer. I learned Spanish, I learned how to handle a military grade assault rifle, and I learned how to shut off my emotions completely. For 3 years, I lived in a sprawling fortified hacienda surrounded by millions of dollars, illegal weapons, and exotic cars. We moved metric tons of cocaine and heroin across the American border. I was a millionaire in dirty money, yet I lived like a monk in a barren room. The cartel was my anesthesia. As long as I was moving, fighting, and surviving, I didn't have to close my eyes and see Elena and Lily. But you cannot outrun the FBI forever. Special Agent Harrison of the FBI had been tracking my phantom trail for years. He knew who I was. He knew I was the Dayton family annihilator who had somehow vanished and climbed the ranks of a Mexican syndicate. Harrison was relentless, a bloodhound who refused to let my family's murder go unanswered. The trap was set in El Paso, Texas. Alejandro had sent me to oversee a massive weapons exchange with a rogue arms dealer. It was supposed to be a standard handoff in an abandoned train yard. The moment I opened the duffel bags of cash, the night sky erupted into blinding white flares. FBI, drop your weapons. The command boomed through a megaphone echoing off the rusted shipping containers. Dozens of armored tactical agents descended upon us. Lasers danced across my chest. My cartel escorts opened fire, initiating a deafening, chaotic firefight. Bullets sparked against steel, tearing through flesh and bone. I dove behind a stack of wooden pallets, gripping my pistol. I could have fought. I had the training, the muscle memory. But as I looked at the flashing red and blue lights, a sudden, overwhelming exhaustion washed over me. The anesthesia wore off. The guilt, suppressed for 3 long years, crashed into me like a freight train. I dropped my gun, fell to my knees, and put my hands behind my head. The trial was a media spectacle in the States, but I pleaded guilty to everything. I didn't say a word in my defense. I was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole at ADX Florence, the most secure Supermax prison in the United States. The first 2 years in solitary confinement were a psychological slaughterhouse. Stripped of drugs, stripped of adrenaline, I was forced to sit in a concrete box for 23 hours a day and face the ghosts of my wife and daughter. I wept until my tear ducts bled. I starved myself, hoping death would take me. I descended into a profound, suffocating darkness. But in the third year, a shift happened. I began to read the letters from my court appointed lawyer detailing the ongoing federal cases against the cartel. I learned a devastating truth. Alejandro Vargas, the man I had served, the man who called me brother, was the primary supplier of the very specific, ultra lethal strain of fentanyl laced meth that had flooded Dayton, Ohio. Alejandro's poison was the exact batch that had broken my mind on that fateful night. He had knowingly pushed the fatal chemicals to poor, desperate Rust Belt towns to maximize profits. He was the architect of my madness. A new fire ignited in my chest. It wasn't the frantic, chaotic fire of drugs, nor the cold, dead fire of the cartel. It was a singular, focused flame of absolute justice. I realized I couldn't just rot in a cell. I owed it to Elena. I owed it to Lily. I had to rip the poison out at its roots. I needed to escape. No one breaks out of ADX Florence, so I had to make them move me. I spent 6 months studying the exact chemical compositions of the cleaning supplies the guards used. I managed to synthesize a highly concentrated, localized explosive from pilfered bleach, ammonia, and crushed batteries. I didn't use it to blow a wall. I used it to trigger a massive, uncontrolled fire in the ventilation shaft of D Wing. The smoke was toxic, filling the block within seconds. The prison protocols dictated an immediate medical evacuation for inmates exposed to the lethal fumes. I inhaled just enough to collapse, my lungs burning, coughing up blood. They strapped me to a gurney and loaded me into a heavily armored medical transport van, bound for a secure federal hospital in Denver. There were 2 armed guards in the back with me, and 2 up front. As we navigated the winding, treacherous mountain roads of the Rockies, a violent thunderstorm rolled in. The rain lashed against the van, the tires struggling for grip. I had been faking my level of unconsciousness. I had also dislocated my right thumb in the cell just before the guards cuffed me, a trick I learned from a cartel sicario years ago. Through agonizing pain, I slipped my right hand free from the steel cuff. As the van took a sharp hairpin turn, I struck. I lunged up, wrapping my handcuffed left arm and my free right hand around the neck of the nearest guard, pulling him down. The second guard drew his weapon, but the van hit a massive pothole, throwing him off balance. I disarmed the first guard, grabbed his taser, and hit the second guard squarely in the chest. The scuffle in the back caused the driver to panic. He slammed on the brakes on the slick asphalt. The heavy van fishtailed, crashed through the highway guardrail, and rolled down a steep, muddy embankment, crashing into the dense pine forest below. I woke up hanging upside down, rain pouring through the shattered windows. The guards were unconscious but breathing. I dragged myself out of the wreckage, my body battered, ribs fractured, but my spirit unbreakable. I stole a guard's sidearm, his tactical jacket, and a wad of cash from his wallet. I disappeared into the brutal, freezing wilderness of the Colorado mountains. The FBI manhunt was unprecedented. My face was plastered on every television screen across America, but I knew how to be a ghost. I moved entirely by night, surviving on scavenged food and rainwater, stealing a rusted motorcycle from a barn in New Mexico, and making a grueling, desperate push south. 2 weeks later, I was back in Mexico. I knew Alejandro's movements, his fortresses, his security protocols. I knew he was currently residing at his crown jewel, a massive, heavily guarded estate deep in the jungles of Chiapas, surrounded by an army of mercenaries. I didn't have an army, I only had a ghost's wrath. I spent a week preparing in a local village, trading the stolen guard's gear and some hidden cartel cash I had buried years ago for an old AR 15, a suppressed pistol, body armor, and explosives. The assault began at midnight under the cover of a torrential tropical downpour. The rain masked my footsteps, and the thunder hid the sound of my suppressed gunshots. I breached the perimeter wall, bypassing the motion sensors I myself had helped install years ago. I moved through the outer courtyard like a shadow. Two guards smoking under a corrugated tin roof dropped silently as I put 2 rounds into their chests. I planted the C4 charges on the estate's main generator and the armory. Boom! The jungle lit up in a magnificent fireball. The entire compound was plunged into chaotic darkness. Panicked shouts in Spanish echoed through the torrential rain. Mercenaries scrambled, firing blindly into the jungle, trying to understand where the assault was coming from. I moved systematically through the chaos. I wasn't the terrified junkie anymore. I was an instrument of retribution. I cleared the corridors of the main house, dropping cartel sicarios with ruthless precision. Bullets shattered the expensive artwork and marble pillars around me. A round grazed my shoulder, another bit into my side, but I felt no pain. I kicked open the heavy oak doors of Alejandro's private study. He was standing behind his mahogany desk, a golden desert eagle in his trembling hands. The power was out, but the lightning illuminated the sheer terror in his eyes when he recognized the ghost standing before him. Thomas, he choked out, his arrogance completely shattered. El Fantasma, you're supposed to be in a cage in America. I broke out. I said, my voice eerily calm, the barrel of my AR 15 leveled directly at his chest. To bring the cage to you. Wait, wait, he screamed, dropping his heavy pistol onto the desk. Whatever you want. Money, territory. I can make you a king down here, Thomas. We are brothers. You poisoned my town, I whispered, the memories of my dying wife and child flashing in my mind. You sold the fentanyl that broke my mind. You put the knife in my hand, Alejandro. It's just business, he cried, backing against the wall. It's just chemicals, Thomas. You pulled the trigger, not me. I know, I said softly, a single tear mixing with the rain and blood on my face. And I will pay for my sins in the next life. But you are going to pay for yours in this one. I pulled the trigger. The deafening roar of the rifle echoed in the study. Alejandro collapsed, his empire of poison ending in a pool of blood on his expensive Persian rug. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the sirens approaching, in the distance the Mexican military finally arriving. I looked at the millions of dollars stacked in Alejandro's open safe. I didn't touch a single bill. The ghost of Thomas the cartel enforcer died in that room right alongside Alejandro. I slipped back out into the jungle, melting into the shadows just as the military helicopters arrived, spotlighting the burning compound. The world thinks I died in that jungle. The FBI eventually closed the file, assuming I bled out from the gunshot wounds or was swallowed by the ruthless wilderness. But I didn't die. I kept walking south. I crossed borders, leaving the violence, the drugs, and the darkness far behind me. Today, the sun rises over a quiet, sparkling blue cove in a remote coastal village in Costa Rica. The air smells of sea salt and blooming hibiscus. I sit on the wooden porch of a small, brightly painted schoolhouse. My hair has gone completely gray, and my face is lined with the deep scars of my past, but my eyes are no longer dead. I go by the name Mateo now. I work as a handyman for a local orphanage. We have very little money, but the laughter of the children playing in the courtyard fills a void in my chest that I thought would remain empty forever. Every morning I teach the older kids how to fix boat engines, how to build things with their own 2 hands, how to create rather than destroy. I still think of Elena and Lily every single day. The grief never truly leaves, it just changes shape. But as a little orphan girl with bright brown eyes runs up to me, smiling brightly and handing me a seashell she found on the beach, I feel a profound, quiet warmth wash over me. I cannot undo the horrors of my past. I cannot bring back the family I lost. But here, in the golden light of the morning sun, surrounded by children who need a protector, I have finally found something I thought I had lost forever: peace.